You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now present the Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome to the Health Hub on Radio Maria Canada, exploring cutting-edge health and wellness information and therapies, helping you to take your health to the next level. I am your host, Kathy Biasi, and I'm a holistic nutritionist and a professional cancer coach. We are talking about mushrooms on today's show. As mushrooms and mushroom products become more mainstream in the diet world, functional medicine, and mental health spaces, it benefits us to get a deeper understanding in these areas so we can determine if and how to use the raw and the manufactured products for our own health. And our guest is Jeff Chilton, founder of Nammex, the first company to supply medical mushroom extracts to the nutritional supplement industry. Jeff studied ethno-mycology at the University of Washington in the late 60s, and in 1973 began a 10-year career as a large-scale commercial mushroom grower. Jeff is the co-author of The Mushroom Cultivator, published in 1983, and Nammex was founded by Jeff in 1989 and is the first company to supply medicinal mushroom extracts to the nutritional supplement industry. In 1997, he organized the first organic certification workshop for mushroom production in China. Jeff is a founding member of the World Society for Mushroom Biology and Mushroom Products in 1994 and a member of the International Society for Mushroom Science. Nammex extracts are used by many supplement and food companies and are noted for their high quality based on scientific analysis of the active components. We are talking all things mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms and dietary mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms in their primary use, how we use mushrooms in our diet, product quality issues with mushroom supplements, a lot of information in this show. Please do stay tuned, and we will be back in just a few minutes to speak with Jeff.
You are listening to Radio Maria Canada. We now continue with the program, The Health Hub, hosted by Kathy Biasi.
Welcome back, everybody. Today's show has been recorded. No opportunity for calling in. Please do follow us on our social sites. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are at the Health Hub RMC on all locations. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Kathy, thank you so much for having me here.
We are here to talk about one of my favorite foods, and that is mushrooms. And I don't lie when I talk about that. You have been in the mushroom world for many, many years. What sparked that interest?
Well, I was born in the Pacific Northwest, and what we're really known for out here is Washington State is called the Evergreen State. It's green. We have lakes, we have rivers. We have a lot of rain. In fact, the rainy season has just started. So we're one of the best places in the world, actually, for wild mushrooms. So mushrooms were all around me as I grew up. And then in the late 60s, I went to the University of Washington, where I studied anthropology, which I loved, not bones, but actual social anthropology. And while I was there, I studied mycology, and it's one of the few universities in the United States that actually has a mycology department. Can you imagine? So
let's stop there for a sec. A lot of people may not know what mycology is.
And well, mycology is the study of fungi.
There you
Fungi
go.
is a
Okay.
huge group. Mushrooms are a part of it, but the number of different fungi out there is astounding. So that's a major field of study, and it's become much more popular these days. But mushrooms are a part of that kingdom, the kingdom of fungi. Now, look, after university, what do you do with a degree in anthropology? Well, not much. Certainly not in the early 70s, and so I went to the only mushroom farm in Washington State and applied for a job and got a job. I thought, wow, it'd be really interesting to learn how to grow mushrooms. I was there at that farm for the next 10 years. It was a very, very large farm producing button mushrooms. And while I was there, we had a scientist that was growing shiitake, oyster, and enoki mushrooms. And Kathy, I was eating fresh shiitake in the 70s.
Well, shiitakes are just making their ways onto our shelves right now. So you're ahead of the game, right?
Oh, and they are just a wonderful mushroom. And I really encourage people to eat mushrooms. Mushrooms are what I call the missing dietary link. And that's something that we should all have in our diet. They're very, very nutritious. They're good level of protein. They're mostly carbohydrate, but good carbohydrates like mannitol that are very slow acting in our system. They're also high in B vitamins, B1, 2, and 3, and high in fiber. And these days that we know all about the microbiome, that fiber is feeding our microbiome. And a lot of that fiber is made up of a compound called beta-glucans, and beta-glucans are what make mushrooms medicinal or functional, which is what our business is all about.
So we talk about mushrooms as a fungi, and I would venture to guess that there's a negative connotation tied to that. Can you explain how they grow and what parts of the mushrooms we ingest
Absolutely.
for both on our plate, and then when we get to the supplement section, I imagine we may dive into even more deeper understanding of the parts of the mushroom.
Well, it's really interesting because when you walk out in the woods or you're walking around the city, you see these mushrooms pop out and you go, where did that come from? Because you can't see, it's not like a tree and you see an apple or anything. Mushrooms don't have seeds. How do you grow a mushroom if there's no seeds? Well, mushrooms have spores. The spores are produced. They fly out on wind currents. They land on the ground. They land on a piece of wood when conditions are right. Those spores will germinate into a very, very fine filament called a hypha. And those hypha will come together and fuse and form a network. That network is called mycelium. We don't normally see it because it's underground, embedded in a piece of wood. That mycelium is part of nature's recyclers. That's breaking down all the organic matter that accumulates every single year, breaking it down, building up its reserves of energy. And when conditions are right, which is the fall out here in the Pacific Northwest, it will produce a mushroom. The mycelium is what we call the vegetative stage. The mushroom is the fruiting stage. The mushroom will come up, it will go through its various stages of growth until it has the cap, it opens up. There are gills underneath that cap. The spores are produced on those gills. Now we have a completion of this life cycle, and it's very important for people to understand, especially when you go looking for a supplement down the line. There are three, what we would call plant parts to this fungal organism. There's a spore, there's a mycelium, and there is a mushroom. And when you look for a supplement, it's very important. Is this a root that we want, like ginseng? Is it a leaf that we want, like ginkgo? So plant part or fungal part is super important, but that's the basic lifestyle of this organism. And so when people are out there and they see a mushroom and they go, oh, where did that come from? Well, underneath there is a mycelial network that is growing, and that's what is producing this mushroom.
Does some of the essence of the nutritional value of the mushroom come from what it is breaking down? So we see chaga on trees, correct? Is it chaga? Is it chaga that's on trees?
Yes, absolutely okay. Right. And that's very, very important what that mushroom happens to be growing from, because that's where it gets the compounds to produce the important properties that it has and the important compounds that are in it. So growing the mushroom, like when we grow the mushroom, we will grow it on what we call substrates that are very similar to what it grows on naturally. Of course, we're giving it the best substrate it has ever had, because we are feeding it specific nutrients in trying to get as high a yield as possible. So substrate is very important, not only for the yield of mushrooms, but also for producing the medicinal compounds that are within it.
Well, then, if we kind of jump over from the healthy mushrooms into the poisonous mushrooms, and we might want to spend a second there about where people can go pick mushrooms and eat them. Is it the substrate of that particular mushroom that its poisonous properties are coming from?
Well, not really. What it is that poisonous mushroom or any mushroom has a certain genetic code, which will in fact produce those compounds. Really, it doesn't really depend a whole lot on what it happens to be growing on in terms of producing those particular compounds. The substrate is really important for the overall yield of the mushroom, and also it does have compounds that we would call precursors, but it's really the genetics that will end up producing those specific compounds. And look, mushrooms, I think, kind of get a bad rap, because when somebody gets poisoned by a mushroom, and especially if it's a deadly poisonous mushroom, we hear about it. We rarely hear about people getting poisoned by plants, but plants also have substances in them that can kill people. And so I'm always like, okay, they're blaming the mushroom again. It's like you have a meal somewhere and you go home and you don't feel very good, and you go, oh, that must have been that mushroom.
Well, the thing is that a lot of people, I see a lot more books on the shelf. I get a lot more questions about foraging mushrooms. Is it a safe thing for people to do, or go to the grocery store and know what you're getting?
Look, it's not safe for people to go out and harvest mushrooms and then bring them home and eat them. You need to go out with somebody that is skilled in the identification of mushrooms before you even dare to eat it. And that's what happens. A large percentage of the poisonings in the United States come from immigrants. They go out, they see a certain group of mushrooms, they harvest them and say, this is exactly like grandma used to pick back in the old country, and I know them well. And they take them home and they eat a lot of them, and it ends up in some cases that it's a deadly poisonous mushroom. And that's where most of the mushroom poisons or cases come from.
Well, when you're choosing to the substrate that you're growing, now your mushrooms are considered organic, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you're choosing the substrate to grow these mushrooms on, is it the substrate in and of itself, or is it the particular mushroom you're trying to cultivate, or does it matter what substrate is on? You're working with spores on the same substrate.
Well, the fact of the matter is that it's kind of interesting, because most of the functional mushrooms that we grow are wood decomposers. So we have a standardized substrate that is made from sawdust primarily, plus bran, which is a carbohydrate, a high sugar part of that, to give the substrate more nutrition for the mushroom to grow. So probably 6 or 7 of the species that we're growing grow on a very similar substrate with just a few minor tweaks. And again, it's so interesting that these, what we would call medicinal or functional mushrooms, are primarily wood decomposers.
Okay, so let's get into the functional medicinal mushrooms versus tabletop cooking mushrooms. I know that mushrooms all have health benefits, but there's a large category of mushrooms, I think it's large, that we can't chew, ingest, cook with. Are those considered the functional mushrooms that you're talking about?
Well, there are certain functional mushrooms that we can buy in the grocery store that are edible. For example, shiitake, maitake, lion's mane. Those are all edible mushrooms that we can take home and eat and gain some of the functional power from them just by eating them. However, there are some like reishi, like chaga. Have you ever seen a chaga?
I have.
Isn't that the craziest thing you've ever seen? Chaga is this gnarly black mass that grows off the side of a tree. It's got a black outer rind that is primarily melanin, and the interior of it is broken down wood tissue. It's not a true mushroom. Chaga is actually the manifestation of a fungal disease. That tree has been parasitized by a fungus that is then producing this chaga. So we cannot grow chaga. All chaga today is wildcrafted. So there are mushrooms like reishi, like chaga, and reishi. I've shown a reishi to people, and a reishi is a beautiful mushroom. It has got the shape of the cap is like a ram's horn. It is red. You can shine it up, so it's just beautifully brilliant. I've shown it to people when I've been out at trade shows. Hey, have you ever heard of reishi mushroom? They look at it, they feel it, and they go, "Is this real? Is this just a piece of wood?" Reishi is like a piece of wood. It's like somebody carved something out of wood. So you cannot eat reishi mushrooms, and that's where some of the mushrooms and most of our mushrooms, we will produce a powdered extract from them, which is a much more bioavailable form, and that's specifically important when it comes to reishi, or another important mushroom, which is called turkey tail, or again the chaga, which is not a mushroom, but it's still something that we consider in this medicinal mushroom category.
Chaga comes from birch tree, isn't that where one of the main trees it grows from?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I have a plethora of chaga trees up north. There's another interesting mushroom, and I think as the conversation goes, I think what we're going to do second half is really get into the, how to cook with these mushrooms, some of the properties, extraction methods. But there's a fungus. I don't know if you consider it a mushroom, cordyceps.
Oh yeah.
That's an interesting one to talk about, because I know in the medicinal fields, in functional medicine, cordyceps is a star.
Oh, absolutely right. And let's definitely talk about cordyceps, because it is the story of cordyceps is just crazy, really. I mean, cordyceps how it is, it's actually wildcrafted originally, and what happens is a larva from a particular moth, which is basically a caterpillar, will hibernate in the coming winter. And this is all up in the Tibet, in very cold areas. It will hibernate underground, just about an inch underground. And during that period, while it's hibernating, spores, which are in the ground of the cordyceps fungus, will germinate, and they will get inside this caterpillar, and they will consume the whole inside of this caterpillar. So all there is just a shell of this caterpillar. It looks really normal, but the inside has been consumed. And in the summer, up will come this little blade Doesn't look at all like you'd think of a mushroom. This little blade, almost like a blade of grass, and that's the cordyceps. But when they harvest it, they will actually, when they see this little blade of grass, they will move back the earth around it, and they will harvest the caterpillar and this fungus part, and that is the wild-crafted cordyceps. They call it winter worm, summer grass, and it is the value of it today is somewhere around $15,000 per dried kilo. Now, can you imagine turning that into a supplement? Nobody can afford it. So what we have done, and what they've done in Asia and started about 10 years ago, they learned how to grow a different but sister species called Cordyceps militaris, which is an amazing fungus that is orange. It's just beautiful. We grow Cordyceps militaris, and so we will have thousands of millions of these small little cordyceps growing in a grow house, and that's what we will now harvest and sell instead of this very, very expensive Cordyceps sinensis. And they've done a lot of research that demonstrates that Cordyceps militaris is as good or better than the original Cordyceps sinensis. So it's just a fascinating mushroom. It's used primarily for fatigue. Seems to help people with oxygen deficiency. So it has become something that a lot of athletes and athletic products are produced with it in there. That's where it seems to go. But originally, what they do in traditional Chinese medicine is that they use it for people who have had a long illness. They're struggling to get over it. They're almost there, but they're not quite. They will give people cordyceps, and that helps them to overcome whatever is holding them back from really getting better.
I watched a YouTube video, fast forwarding of the whole process of cordyceps. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was fascinating, just fascinating to see.
Oh yeah.
It really is something to watch. When someone told me what it was from, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So I Googled it and YouTubed it, and it was just absolutely fascinating.
Well, yeah. And our cordyceps, we do not grow it on insects. So people don't need to worry about the fact that, oh, gee, am I eating bugs here or whatever. No, we don't grow it on insects. It's grown on a natural substrate, but again, it is, I believe, a better functional mushroom than the Cordyceps sinensis, half of which, when you get it, is the caterpillar itself. And I took that around Natural Foods Expo 30 years ago, and I showed cordyceps to people, and they looked at it and they said, you know what, my customers are vegetarian. They don't want to eat caterpillars. And I thought, well, yeah, that's a kind of a deal breaker here with this cordyceps.
Okay, terrific. I loved ending on that note, because I wanted to make sure that we were going to talk about that. I was just so intrigued when I saw the video. We're going to take a quick break here, everybody. We will be back in just a few minutes to continue our conversation with Jeff. Welcome back to our program.
You are listening to The Health Hub here on Radio Maria Canada, a Catholic voice wherever you are. To contact us and be a part of the show, email thh@radiomaria.ca. We now continue with the program. Here once again is your host, Kathy Biasi.
Everybody, we are talking with Jeff Chilton, and we are talking all about mushrooms. Jeff, you went to China to do a lot of your research and study when it comes to mushrooms. Why did you go along that path?
Well, it's really interesting. My background, of course, is in mushroom cultivation, large scale mushroom cultivation that I learned during the 70s, 10 years at the mushroom farm there. And one of the things I learned was, of course, the economics of growing mushrooms. And for one, I realized that you can't grow mushrooms in North America and put them into the supplement space because for example, if you were to grow shiitake mushrooms and you sell them for $5 a pound fresh, great, you got a good business going. However, supplements are dried powder. You dry out that pound of shiitake mushrooms, which is 90% water. Now you have to get $50 for that same pound of shiitake. Economics do not work in terms of producing mushrooms, the actual mushroom in North America, and selling as a supplement. In 1989, I took my first trip to China for an international conference on mushrooms there. And that began a 10-year back and forth with me taking trips to China. I traveled all over China, many different places. China, for one, that's where we get our knowledge of functional mushrooms from traditional Chinese medicine. They've used specific species for thousands of years. China has many research institutes there, which I visited. They have mushroom conferences almost every year. They have tens of thousands of small growers. So I went over and I made a lot of contacts, visited lots of farms, and that's where Nammex grows our mushrooms in China. In 1997, I took OCIA, one of the primary or prime organic certification organizations in the United States, with me to China, and we held the very first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China. That was 1997. 3 years later, we had organically certified mushrooms. And look, a lot of people are like, oh, China, I wouldn't eat anything coming out of China. Well, the United States and in North America, we pour millions of gallons of pesticides and chemicals on all of our foods. We have a small organic sector, but the number of chemicals that we have, and there's areas where, of course, you don't want to eat the produce that comes out of the Gulf Coast of the United States. We grow all our mushrooms back in the mountains in very clean areas with clean water and clean air. And so it just made sense for me to organize mushroom production in China, and then we will process those mushrooms into an extract powder. And then before they are shipped, we test them for heavy metals, for pesticides, a whole microbiological panel. They get very deep testing there. We ship them over to the U.S. To our warehouse. We test them a second time. We do a tremendous amount of testing on all our products, which I feel it is very, very important. And so that whole part of things for us has been very important. And China produces over 85% of the world's mushrooms. And we're talking about not only the biggest mushroom farms in the world, the most mechanized, the most advanced mushroom farms in the world, but also farms like we use that are owner operated. They're back in the mountains, very natural conditions that we give our mushrooms. And this is something, to me, that's very important, the way we grow our mushrooms and how they're processed, and the fact that they are certified organic by high quality French certifiers.
Okay. So let's really get down into the difference between a functional mushroom and, would you consider edible mushrooms functional mushrooms? Or are they completely different category?
No, I consider them functional mushrooms. They're not quite on the same level as what we're selling. I have a book, Kathy, that's called The Icons of Medicinal Mushrooms in China. And they have 270 species that they demonstrate have some scientific information behind the fact that they have medicinal qualities. Well, 270, I'm not going to sell 270 mushrooms. So we've got it down to about 10 to 12 specific species that have a lot of traditional use. And that's how we choose them. We look at the traditional use, and then we go out and look at the science behind them. And there's a tremendous body of science in especially the Japanese science is really, really good. So we use the science to basically qualify the fact that, okay, traditional Chinese medicine use this. The science backs that up, and that's how we choose those 10 or 12 species from all those 270 species. So,
and these are ones that you can't cook with.
Some of them you can. Okay. Again, like the maitake, like the shiitake, like the lion's mane. And a quick note on cooking. How many times have you heard a young 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 10-year-old kid go, I hate mushrooms, those slimy
I hear
things.
25-year-old kids say it.
You cannot imagine how many times I've heard that. But,
It's a texture. I don't like the texture.
exactly. And the key is, look, you have to cook. If you're let's sauteing them, for example, you have to use a hot pan. If your pan is too cool, what happens is all of the water will come right out of those mushrooms. Mushrooms, like most vegetables, are 90% water. The water will come out. Now you're cooking them in a pool of water. Of course, they're going to come out kind of slimy and rubbery. You have to cook them in a hot pan, which keeps the moisture in. They will shrink. That's fine. And what I do is I like to brown them. So I'll slice them about 1/4 inch thick. I'll throw them in my favorite oil, which people can, whatever they like. I brown them up. Sometimes in that pan, I'll even flip them over by hand if I have to, but I want to brown both sides. When they come out, they're not wet and slimy. You basically caramelize them. So they're very nice texture. I mean, it's interesting because many different mushroom species have different textures, and the Chinese are like amazing when it comes to textures. My God, they eat things that I would go like, okay, no, I'm not going to eat that. Like they're chewing on a some kind of very real fibrous something, or a ligament or something, and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think so. But that's the key. If you're eating mushrooms, cook them properly, and the beauty